If you're even vaguely aware of the indie game scene, there are going to be a couple games you will have heard of by now. Hollow Knight, Undertale, Dead Cells. But one of the most famous indie games, practically a household name for indie fans, is Shovel Knight. I absolutely adore Shovel Knight, having grown up with the game since it first released. I was around 8 years old at the time. Our babysitter always took us to a frozen yogurt place where I would finish mine before my siblings to be able to go to the next door GameStop to play a demo of the game before we had to leave. I loved playing through the intro stage to the Shovel Knight demo and can't remember being much happier at that age than the time I finally defeated Black Knight. It's nearly been a decade since that happened and I want to see how well the game holds up. Despite the rose-tinted glasses, I do actually want to see how this game holds up compared to the likes of Mega Man X, since I recently played that game and loved it to pieces. Especially now that Yacht Club has made 3 other traditional platformers, each with qualities that outshine the original Shovel of Hope. I'd like to see what made this game so special. Was it the game just being extremely good, or was it simply being supported by its legendary legacy? Let's see what made Shovel Knight, Shovel Knight. The premise of the game is a simple one. Your adventuring buddy has vanished into the Tower of Fate, sending you, Shovel Knight, into a life of solitude and depression. During your absence, an evil order, which has little to no quarter... Okay, so I just looked this up. Apparently that means to have no mercy and can be considered as an act equal to a war crime. Jesus. Anyway. An evil order has taken over the land, with the Tower of Fate opening up once more. You see the opportunity, and without losing hope, make your way to attempt to save your partner. Just as the games it's based on, the premise is a simple one, simply there to get your adventure started for the most part. The characters here have interesting personalities that line up well with the theming of their stages, but are still one-dimensional for the most part. But still have enough personality for people to reasonably cling on to any of these characters as a favorite without much question. The only real character of note is Black Knight, who seems to be taking a different approach to solving the same problem as Shovel Knight. But he's simply the rival character, so not much to see at the moment. He does have a cool catchphrase and evil laugh at the very least. But since when has story ever been a major focus of older games? We're here to get into the classic platforming we know and love. The gimmick this game decides to work with is, of course, the shovel. A versatile tool for both digging and using as a pogo stick to smash the skulls of your enemies in. Your basic attack and Scrooge-inspired shovel drop are your primary tools for both platforming and combat. The shovel drop feels very finely tuned, and it becomes extremely satisfying to chain pogos against enemies or bosses, and the verticality it offers opens up plenty of levels. And these levels make sure to take advantage of this verticality along with adding your own gimmicks along the way. Like classic Mega Man, you're running through 8 themed stages with a boss waiting at the end of each one. Some of the locals visited can be seen as somewhat generic, such as a graveyard and a castle, but they all still have their own gimmicks and details that add layers of personality to themselves, such as how the castle is built of solid gold, or the graveyard decides to double down on the spook with ghosts appearing from destroyed graves and skeletons aplenty. And it can't be understated just how much the music and art do to enhance the themes of each stage. The Flying Machine, a great stage on its own, is amplified by the beautiful color palette and the music. Explodatorium's chaos is made more intense through the song of that stage, and Clockwork Tower has a very mechanical feel to its music, complementing the stage nicely. No complaints here in the slightest. And I would say the themes of the stage vastly improved by the third set of bosses, with a Clockwork Tower full of mechanisms, a stranded ship frozen over in the tundra, and a vast flying machine soaring through windy skies. Speaking of which, one way Shovel Knight deviates from its predecessors is how the game progresses much more linearly. The game is split into 4 segments, the first 3 sharing a handful of the main 8 bosses each, and the 4th having your typical endgame amalgamations of all previous challenges for a couple final castle stages. The linearity makes for a much smoother difficulty curve and helps the average player be able to go through the game blind without the frustrations present in past Mega Man games. Theming and difficulty are top-notch here, but how fun are these stages to actually play through? I just love all of them. The different elements each stage introduces are all extremely fun. Pridemore Keep keeps It's simple, but has cool element on how you pogo on these books to reveal hidden paths temporarily. The Lich Yard has these really well utilized dark rooms, which doesn't get too annoying due to the nice use of lightning. Iron Whale makes good use of water for low gravity mechanics. Explodatorium has, well, explosions. Lots of them. Plus it truly feels like the workplace of a mad scientist with these Shovel Knight clones you run into. The flying machine uses plenty of wind gimmicks and is very heavy on airtime when dealing with different rooms. Clock Tower has moving parts all over the place demanding your attention. I could really keep going here. Every element introduced feels fun and doesn't overstay their welcome once used in a couple of unique ways. There's also the intuitive life system, or lack thereof. Shovel Knight was a bit ahead of its time by getting rid of the life system completely. You die, you're sent back to the checkpoint. The downside being you drop some money in the spot you died. They also added this really cool risk-reward system where you can break checkpoints for cash. The harder a level segment, indicated by the volume of gems shown in the checkpoint, the more money you get for breaking it. Just don't die or else you're moving very far back into the level. But of course, we can't forget about the bosses waiting at the end of each stage. Instead of the theme being men, we have knights. Everyone in this cast is a knight, and I find this very funny. Some of the casts look like proper knights, others look like you slapped some armor onto them for the sake of it, and a few just don't look like knights at all. Plague Knight is literally in a hoodie, and Tinker Knight is just wearing a welding mask. I love it so much. The boss fights themselves are quite fun. The thing to note here is the lack of invincibility frames they get, so if you're able to, you can go absolutely wild on bosses. Although it doesn't mean bosses are too short. You'll still be fighting them long enough to see most all of their movesets, if you're not too experienced anyways, and each one is quite unique. This is helped by the boss's use of their stage gimmicks most times. Treasure Knight will be fought underwater, Mole Knight has plenty of digging involved in the fight for both parties, Spectre Knight will be fought in darkness late into the fight, and so on. The bosses also hold a wide variety of fighting styles, which makes each one feel unique. Plague Knight's trickery, Tinker Knight's trippery, Spectre Knight's agility, Mole Knight's digging ability. It makes them all quite memorable. I would be lying if I said these bosses were hard, however. You will usually have enough health to be able to face tank nearly everything, save the insta-kills like in Polar Knights and Propeller Knights fights. There's also the Relics, in which a good portion make these bosses an absolute joke. Relics in this game are your typical special weapons in Mega Man games, with a few changes. Relics aren't obtained by beating bosses, but are found in each boss stage. And relics share one resource instead of each having their own. Stronger relics cost more magic, and you can upgrade your magic throughout the game. Since relics aren't connected to bosses, there isn't a weakness system, and relics don't have to be tied to the bosses in terms of how they work. In terms of actual functionality, the relics are quite a mixed bag. We have the busted, the near useless, and everything in between. Despite this, I quite like the relics. I'm not going to act like I don't treat them as much more than a box on a checklist of things to collect when I replay the game most times, but when I do go out of my way to use them, I consistently find them quite enjoyable. Most are pretty situational, but fun nonetheless. Take the mobile gear, practically useless outside of going down this one hull faster, but still fun to find the right spots to use it in levels to tear through enemies. Chaos Sphere is terrible against your normal enemies, but when used against bosses, it is an absolute force of destruction. The biggest weakness of the relics is the balancing. I mean, if you play through this game for more than 20 minutes, you already know about how busted the phase lock it is, having cheap on-command iframes. And then there's the likes of the Warhorn, which cost a fifth of your magic when maxed out, not even normally, to barely act as a screen clear, only being useful during the dream segments where enemies drop a bunch of extra cash. And like I said, even outside of phase lock, some of these relics just absolutely tear through bosses, and others do practically nothing. There is a massive imbalance of power here. While I wouldn't blame anybody for not looking twice towards relics, I think they are still a positive addition to the game at the end of the day. Especially in New Game Plus, when you start with maxed out magic and all the relics, it becomes quite fun to spam and experiment in levels. Relics aren't the only thing to spice up gameplay, as halfway through the game you unlock a second hub which sells armors and shovel upgrades. The armors offer basic gameplay additions, such as having money lost on death or increasing magic for the price of decreasing defense. Suffice to say, the armors aren't balanced either. The Dynamo armor is by far the best, where 2 consecutive pogos on the shovel grants you a charge slash. When the normal charge slash is slow and harder to time, this is just a straight up improvement to your moveset. The only reason I wouldn't use this armor is if I want to do cool flips in the gold armor. A very enticing reason, but doesn't change how busted Dynamo armor is compared to the rest of the set. The shovel upgrades don't do much other than the charge slash. One lets you dig piles of dirt instantly, the other lets you shoot ground sparks if you're at full health, which really won't be often enough to matter. The only other upgrades throughout the game are for health and magic, which you get some health upgrades for free anyways. There's also the Tropal King. Trupal King? Who really knows? There you can bring him 2 chalices to fill up with consumable powers, and yeah, guess what? One is busted, the other 2 are mid. And while we're on the topic of the Trupal King, I just want to take a quick tangent about just how charming this game truly is. I mean, the Trupal King is a standout example, having just an awesome dance sequence which we all squat to in sync, do not deny it. But even interactions with NPCs around the hubs are quite fun in themselves. My favorite is the farmer who inspects your digging to see if you are the Shovel Knight. Dig it up normally, he's pretty happy. Dig it with the shovel upgrade, he is ecstatic. Dig it with the fishing rod, he questions your style. Or there's even playing with the Hoop Kid and using a charge slash to launch the hoop into space, leaving her in silence. It's always been little details that make a game memorable, and Shovel Knight stands as no exception to that rule. Okay, but back to the chalices I mentioned earlier. I feel it ties into one of Shovel Knight's bigger problems. The balancing all around is constantly favored to 1 or 2 items, leaving everything else behind. Relics, armors, upgrades, chalices, it's all there, and there is constantly a known bias for choosing one over the others. Yes, I could go out of my way to use these other things, but if I'm playing the game casually, why actively hinder myself? Relics are fine since I can switch in between them on a dime's notice, but chalices and armors are a pain to change up, and I just tend to stick with what works. It feels like a problem at the core of how some of these items were designed, as I'm sure people would still gravitate to free iframes even if it was expensive, or mid-level healing even if it was halved in effect. None of these upgrades come for free, as you do have to collect money to pay for all these goodies. Gold collection is probably my favorite aspect of this game, as spread throughout levels there's plenty of chests with cash along with music sheets as a collectible to give a nice 500 gold each. Exploring every nook and cranny for these secrets is what makes replaying the game so fun for me. I've played through the game so much and have learned where all the hidden treasures are, where I'm at a point I can just buy everything without needing to revisit any stages, and it feels great. And even if you aren't the best at exploring, the game doesn't leave you too strapped for cash if you can't find anything, as bosses will give you a couple thousand each, along with plenty of bonus levels and extra bosses. Bonus levels are typically designed with 1 or 2 of your relics in mind, and do a great job exploring what these things can do. I personally love soaring through the Propeller Dagger stage. Meanwhile, the extra bosses are just alright. Of the handful, 2 feel like all they have to offer is screen clutter, 2 have extremely easy patterns to dodge and counter, and 2 are actually really fun to fight. Compared to the main cast of fights, some of these could have used some more time in the oven, but they're all fun to say the least. The gold collection, though, is honestly, like I said, my favorite part about the game. It feels the most balanced, everything being priced quite accordingly, my only real complaint being the magic upgrades get insanely expensive when stacked together, for not nearly as much of a payout as you would get for like health upgrades. But regardless, most things feel pretty fair in price. The gold just acts as a really good incentive to explore these levels, and again gives plenty of good reason to actually replay these stages, seeing how much you can find. I always like looking at the credits and seeing just how much gold I collected over the journey compared to other runs. The game comes to its climax as we run through the final tower stages with remixed mechanics aplenty. An amazing rematch against Black Knight at the end of the first stage, followed by, oh, who could have guessed, a boss rush. Although, I will say this one's quite fun. After having played through 10 Mega Man games within 2 months, each capping off with a boss rush that is extremely slow and tedious, except X1, love that game, it was extremely refreshing to play through a fast-paced gauntlet of the fights. We finally encounter the Enchantress, the person who formed the Order of Little to No Quarter and brought ruin to the land. After a brief, and sometimes very annoying fight, it's revealed to us that Shield Knight, our partner who is lost, was under a curse that made her the Enchantress, in which it also seems like Black Knight knew that. Though the power of the Enchantress still lingers after her defeat, which Shovel Knight and Shield Knight work together to fend off once and for all. It's a simple but effective final boss, and it's really cool to see how well Shield Knight and Shovel Knight actually work together, done through gameplay instead of text or backstory. The remnant of fate, what's left of the Enchantress, doesn't go down without a fight, taking down Shovel Knight in their dying moments. As the tower crumbles, Black Knight saves Shovel Knight by Shield Knight's request. God, that's a lot of knights. The tower falls with the town in celebration. Order finally returns to the kingdom, and Shield Knight reunites with Shovel Knight by the campfire, leaving our two adventurers in a happy ending. So, how does Shovel Knight hold up? While I still believe that it has plenty of aspects that are weaker than future games, which is to be expected mind you, it still holds up as a solid platformer. It takes just enough inspiration from the Mega Man games where it feels familiar while adding enough of its own charm to set itself apart from the inspiration, something that doesn't feel nearly as common as it used to within the indie scene. I was honestly surprised at how well this game still stands, even after I had developed a new love for what came before it. It still stands as a well-crafted game at its core, where most complaints often end up as nitpicks. The game isn't anything astonishing or an experience you must have, but it doesn't need to be, and it knows it. It's here to act as a return to what worked in the past, and hits the nail on the head for that goal. The game does still deserve all the praise it's received, and still gets. While we have yet to hear of Shovel Knight's exploits after this adventure, maybe there's another side to the story of this one that we have yet to hear. But that's a discussion for another day, and until then, thank you all for watching, and I hope ye all have a very lovely evening.